incredible, wide-ranging plenum that they have organized. And I'd also like to welcome all the panelists here. It's really quite a wealth of information embodied in these people. All of us have worked on the negotiations or the preparatory commission or both. I've known most of the people on the panel for quite a number of years, and I welcome them all. To my left immediately is Mr. Hossam Ali, who's Disarmament and International Security Counselor at the Permanent Mission of Egypt to the UN. Hossam worked in the Provisional Technical Secretariat in Vienna. Mr. Lee at the Korean Institute of Nuclear Safety. He's the head of Radiation Detection and Monitoring Department, and he also goes to the CTBT work on verification in Vienna. Mr. David McCormick, who is head of the Nuclear Explosion Monitoring Program of the Geological Survey of Canada, and Dr. Wang Jun, who is Chinese head of delegation at the CTBTO. Well, I would just like to mention a few points before turning it over to the conference, to the other panelists here. Many of you know quite a bit about the treaty, so I won't go into great detail. But as of now, we have 182 states who have signed the treaty, and 153 have ratified. So this means that they believe the verification requirements are adequate for them. The CTBT has more far-reaching verification provisions of probably any other treaty, especially if you consider that the Biological Weapons Convention and the Partial Test Ban Treaty have no verification. There are 337 seismic, radionuclide, infrasound, hydroacoustic, and stations and laboratories, and these are rather unique networks. More than 85% of this international monitoring system have been implemented, and they provide data that is difficult for any country to access on its own. Yet there are 16,000 seismological stations in the world outside of the international monitoring system, and these, along with other national technical means, can be used for countries who are concerned about non-compliance. And I think some of the panelists will go into this more. The IMS, or International Monitoring System, data has high credibility because they're produced by a system in a transparent way. They have high-quality stations built to specifications that have been agreed by the Preparatory Commission. The data is authenticated to ensure it is not tampered with. The IMS data is routinely analyzed by the Technical Secretariat. It's provided in a standardized way, a standardized format from countries around the world, and produced then by an international data center in Vienna. The detection capability, as you most have heard, is greater than expected. The detection is better than 1 kiloton globally and below 0.1 kilotons in most parts of the Northern Hemisphere. There are new scientific developments that are being integrated, such as data analysis and data mining, but it's important to note that the treaty has to keep up with scientific developments from the outside world, and hopefully vice versa. In the treaty, states have the task of making assessments on possible non-compliance, not the Technical Secretariat. And this is rather contrary to the IAEA, where in the CTBT, only states can request an on-site inspection. For an on-site inspection, the Executive Council needs to vote. 31 out of 50 members need to vote for an on-site inspection. And in this regard, a lot has been said, especially in the United States. I won't go into the political details of that, but it should be noted that the selection of members of the Executive Council is based on the number of stations that a state has, their technical capabilities, technical expertise, financial contributions to the organization, and other factors that basically ensure P5 membership on the Executive Council. There's also a long discussion in the U.S. about the scope of the treaty. This is rather U.S.-centric argument. If you want more discussion about it, I would recommend the Congressional Commission report that was done by the U.S. Institute of Peace a few years ago. The P5 nuclear weapon states agreed after a year of discussions among themselves in the negotiations that the CTBT should be a zero yield. All five announced this in the Conference on Disarmament, and I and a number of us here were there to witness that. As the negotiator from the U.S., Ambassador Steve Ledigar, said, zero means zero. If it produces any yield whatsoever, it's not allowed. So since we don't have any PowerPoint possibilities here, I'll just take the opportunity to mention that Dr. Dahlman and I and a few others who are very involved in the CTBT have recently written a book that's about to be published called Detect and Deter: Can Countries Verify the Nuclear Test Ban? And it goes into a look at the treaty from a state's perspective, what countries can do for verification rather than just relying on the organization itself. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ola Dahlman, who probably knows more about this treaty than any other human on the planet. He's been working on it for many years, including from the group of scientific experts. Ola, please.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a fantastic conference, actually. My thanks to Asan for bringing us all here. Yeah, it's been a long journey for the test ban treaty, and there might be still some rough waters ahead. We know that there are 9 states out there that need to ratify before the treaty enters into force. And this illustrates the importance of the states. This is a treaty that is owned by the states, and where the states have the task of verifying and of course also supporting the international organization. I'm saying that because especially those of us who spend a lot of time in Vienna, we have had our discussions all focus around the organization there, the CTBTO, and we feel that this is where the responsibility for the verification rests, and that's not true. It's the states that have the responsibility. And verification has played an essential role in CTBT. You may say maybe surprisingly so, given the large signature of a nuclear explosion. If Jennifer mentioned that the BWC, the Biological Convention, doesn't have any verification measures, and here we have a battery of them, and I'll allude to some, and others will expand on that. So let me talk a little bit about verification. There are in the treaty three steps. It's the monitoring, it's the consultation, and it's the on-site inspection. The treaty and the organization in Vienna provides for an international monitoring system. It's a quite fantastic system with these 300-something stations around the world, and I'm sure Dave will talk more about those. And they have been very successful. They have certainly surpassed our expectations we had during the negotiations. And this system, which is available to any states, and it was built to provide the same capability to all states, to even out the differences that existed among states. That was basically the task we had to do. And it is an important tool to any states, also to the most advanced states. But states can add whatever monitoring facilities they want. And this is really important to say, because there are a lot of assets out there. Jennifer alluded to them. There are numerous seismological stations, for example. There are some additional radionuclide stations. There are certainly the satellite systems that are not part of the treaty. The treaty was formed sort of 15 years ago, and satellites were not really, satellite data were not generally available at that time. At least it was very expensive. There was still some political sensitivity about this. That's why it's not in the treaty. And of course then each state has its national technical means. The states has one more thing. It can put its political priority on where to do the monitoring. The international system is aimed at giving as good as capability as we can everywhere, to look this in an even-handed way. You don't do that when you are a state. You have areas of concern, and you monitor those. And we do this, what we call in this publication, we call it precision monitoring. You focus all your asset on a particular area. And this is probably a good region to discuss this, because we know that there are areas here, at least an area here, that we would like to focus on. And if we do that, and this is obviously what some countries actually do, you will get capabilities that are at least 10 times, maybe 100 times better than what you get as a global average. If we talk about 1 kiloton or a tenth of a kiloton, we may talk about 10 tons or maybe even lower in areas as North Korea. So I think by this kind of focusing the efforts and do precision monitoring, you gain an enormous amount in detection capability. But there's one more important thing, and that is how well can you locate an event. And I should have said that from the beginning. We talk basically about underground nuclear explosions. We know that the treaty prohibits everything, but it seems so trivial, basically, to monitor explosions in the atmosphere or in the oceans. We know the oceans are totally transparent. You set off an explosion in one side of the ocean, you can, of a 10, 50, 100 kilograms, you see it in the other side of the ocean because of a sort of a low velocity zone there that covers. And in the atmosphere, you have all the radionuclides spread around the world, and you can easily detect it. And for underground, you have only two techniques. You have the seismic, and you have the xenon gas, and we will hear more about the xenon gas. So by doing this kind of precision monitoring, you not only increase the detection capability, but also the location capability. And this is essential because the present global location capability is not so great. There is an uncertainty that we can describe that half of the events that we locate have an uncertainty of about 15, 20 kilometers. And that is about the size of the area of 1,000 square kilometers that you can ask for in an on-site inspection. So there is a particular risk that you wouldn't find the right area to do the on-site inspection. So you need to boost up the precision of your location. And you can do that by really working on a particular area. You can come down to a few kilometers, and then you are also well off for a on-site inspection. So I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of capability available for states in monitoring. It doesn't come free. States have to do something about it. They have to reanalyze the data. They have to redo the computations. So I'm quite convinced that what we will see, and what I certainly would encourage, is a cooperation among those countries that have similar political priorities. Those countries who want to look at the same areas. And maybe you do that on a regional basis because the concerns are very often regional. And then you come together, you form your own maybe regional centers or whatever, and you have your cooperation there. And you share the burden and you share the results. And I think we very much would like to do a pitch for that. I think I will stop there by just 2 words about the on-site inspection, which is an extremely potent tool, where I think a lot of progress has been made in Vienna. Further progress has to be made. And I think it's also here important that states take the lead and provide leadership and expertise to make sure that we at entry into force have a workable on-site inspection regime. Jennifer.
Well, thank you very much, Ola. David, Dr. McCormick.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer, and I'd like to add my thanks to those that have gone before me, to Asan for bringing us all here. What I'll do briefly, I think, is just review where things sit at the moment in Vienna, where we are in terms of the development of the treaty framework and verification system. Many of you will recall back in '96 when the negotiations of the treaty were concluded and the treaty opened for signature. The intent was to build up the verification system such that it would be in place and ready when the treaty entered into force. And at that point, in the first flush of enthusiasm, the expectation was that the treaty would be entering into force in as little as 3 years. So we had a 3-year program to develop the verification program, and we're now in year 14 of that 3-year program. The good news is significant progress has been made in terms of developing the verification system. The monitoring system, the stations out around the world that are detecting possible signals in all different environments, the seismic stations, the acoustic infrasound listening to the atmosphere, the underwater stations, and perhaps most currently of interest, the radionuclide stations detecting both particulate radionuclide information and also xenon noble gas have all gone through periods of development, depending on the maturity of the technology, either straightforward or more painful. And now we're at a situation 14 years later where the system really is more or less complete in terms of a global monitoring capability. There are still a few areas where there are some challenges. I would note particularly there has been some difficulty in getting agreement to install monitoring stations in many of the countries in the Middle East, and there continues to be something of a lacuna in that area. And there have been some challenges in getting what I might consider routine data flowing from a couple of the larger countries that are contributing to the network. But aside from that, we have a more or less fully functional network at this point, which the states are using, and they're using for a variety of different purposes. They're using it to begin to test their own systems for future potential verification of a treaty, were it to come into force, and technicians and scientists and engineers being what they are and who they are, they're using it for whatever else their minds can invent as well. So we've seen in the last couple of years not only the use of the system to provide some analysis for the international community of the 2006 and 2009 DPRK announced tests, but we've also seen it used for applications as varied as the detection of volcanoes and the emission of ash into the atmosphere for aviation. We've seen it being used to track whales moving around in the Pacific Ocean. And we've seen it very much front and center in the last couple of months, providing a transparent and non-domestic method of getting a handle on what was going on in Fukushima through the radionuclide systems in a situation where there was some significant international concern about the transparency and veracity of the data that was coming out into the international community from the domestic systems in Japan. Of course, on the one hand, the demonstration of the capability of the system is something that's very useful. It has great utility in terms of giving us confidence that the system that's being built will be fit for purpose. On the other hand, it does present something of a challenge. First of all, in terms of keeping the focus of the organization, keeping the focus of the development on its primary raison d'etre, which is to ensure compliance with the treaty itself. And also in the particular situation we find ourselves now, where there's perhaps not such an imminent prospect of entry into force, it provides challenges in terms of keeping the organization itself focused and avoiding creep into other areas where perhaps there are legitimate gaps in the global capability to address other issues of societal concern. I recall that there was a significant pressure to use the data from the IMS after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami to address what was clearly identified as a gap in the collective international ability to monitor for tsunamis in the Indian Ocean. And given the catastrophe and the humanitarian catastrophe that had been caused, significant pressure to take advantage of a system that we had collectively contributed to and paid for and built to use for those purposes. My sense is that within certain constraints, that's of course a reasonable thing for us to do. We shouldn't hamstring ourselves, but at the same time, it does create the difficulty and the danger, and it's important to try to hold back on the unbridled enthusiasm to use this network, which is built for very specific purpose, for the whole host of other potential applications that it could be brought to bear upon, and losing the focus on bringing along those states who haven't yet accepted the idea of having these rather intrusive facilities in their territory, bringing them along with the rest of the community. And we have seen in some cases states who have quite overtly used the fact that some of these applications are going on as a justification for dragging their heels on building some of these facilities in their territory, which they are required to do as part of their signature to the treaty. The treaty itself has had a number of other, I think, consequences which are worthy of note. It's certainly enormously democratized the knowledge of the business of nuclear explosion detection and verification around the world. It's moved it away from the preserve of really a very few states with particular expertise and a long history. And it's created really a second generation now, coming on the generation that was brought up in the 60s and 70s through the various treaties that were put in place then, the TTBT, the LTBT, and so on. A second generation of scientists from a much broader range of countries around the world who've been trained in Vienna, who've worked in Vienna, and in now many cases, because of the term limits of staff working in Vienna, after 5 or 7 or 9 years, going back to their home countries, often forming the nucleus of their own national data centers and national capabilities, and bringing that knowledge about how to do this business out to many, many dozens of countries now around the world. So it's had that very direct benefit in terms of bringing up the general standard of knowledge and capability of medium-level countries that nevertheless want to have some ability to verify and understand these issues themselves, rather than relying on the information that has come from the great powers, and which at times in the past has proven to be perhaps less than reliable. On the perhaps less positive side, the devil makes work for idle hands, and in the absence of a strong political momentum at this point towards our entry into force, we have seen the Preparatory Commission at times become a sandbox for non-related issues getting dragged into this, issues that really have nothing to do with the treaty itself. We've seen very difficult discussions on issues related to, for example, the status of Palestine as an observer state in the CTBT. Some rather bitter arguments over budget issues, broader UN budget issues, zero real growth versus zero nominal growth, and so on. And I think, coming at this from the perspective that within the technical organizations in the states, within the states themselves, who are active in Vienna and who are trying to build up the verification system, I'll leave for this point, at this point, the discussion of the on-site inspection. We can discuss that perhaps in the questions and answers. Really, our focus has been very much not to be an impediment to any future potential opportunities that may arise for political movement forward. Trying to keep the focus on the technical issues that need to be solved and that can be solved at this juncture. Trying to systematically de-emphasize and reduce the focus on either those technical issues which are unresolvable and which in the end simply will require a political fiat, or those issues which are not actually technical at all, but which are political issues under the guise of technical considerations. So very much our approach, and when I say our approach now, I think speaking as one of the representatives of the states in Vienna, the approach has been to move the technical implementation forward to as mature a state as is feasible to do, given the lack of a strong political movement towards entry into force, ensure that the technical implementation is not an impediment to that entry into force, and seek to try to keep the organisation moving forward and engaged, such that if an opportunity does arise, then the verification regime will be fit for purpose and will be ready in a reasonably cost-effective and reasonably efficient way to play its role in the verification of compliance. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Mr. Lee, I think you might wish to concentrate a little on the regional issues, especially considering where we are.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think it's a timely discussion and timely meeting in terms of our nuclear is unclear future both UN and ARPA. So I'd like to talk about some possibility of regional cooperation to enhance CTBT monitoring capability. To begin with, I would like to touch international monitoring stations' role of CTBTO, especially radionuclide stations. Thank you. After Fukushima nuclear power plant accident last March 11th, some of radionuclides, for instance, radioactive xenon, cesium, iodine, etc., have been spread out all over the world. Those radionuclides were detected in the IMS stations of CTBTO and our own country's stations as well. At that time, the data of global radioactivity levels were shared in real time, and which collected by International Data Center of CTBTO every day. Those data provided valuable information on planning radiological protective countermeasures in each country. Actually, most people, probably excluding Japanese, recognized the impact on public health and the environment were negligible. Obviously, the IMS network of CTBTO contributed to reducing the anxiety resulting from the Fukushima accident for the public in terms of public health and environment. The next point I would like to deal with is how we are able to improve on our detection capabilities in case of further nuclear test by DPRK. So, when the DPRK conducted the second nuclear test in 2009, we could not detect the noble gas resulting from the test. And all of CTB, the radionuclide stations, didn't as well. Anyway, nobody knows the reason why the noble gas were not detected at all of stations surrounded North Korea. As you know, where the detection possibilities of radionuclides, especially noble gas radionuclides released from test site, depend on weather conditions. For example, wind direction, rain, etc. If we want to enhance our monitoring capabilities, we need to cooperate with the surrounding nations, neighbor on the suspicious area or suspicious country. Thus, we need to make a framework of cooperation on regional basis. For example, a rapid deployment of mobile monitoring systems at the boundary between DPRK and South Korea, but also between DPRK and China, between DPRK and Russia, between DPRK and Japan as well. In terms of this cooperation, we proceeded to Memorandum of Understanding with the French Atomic Energy Commission now, and also on the framework of technical cooperation between our institute and the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in USA and Swedish Defense Research Institute, FY. We are now developing new technology on detecting radionuclides from underground nuclear test. Okay, finally, we will contribute to establishing a framework of regional cooperation in terms of the implementation of treaty. According to Provisional Technical Secretariat, PTS of CTBTO report on 2011 program and budget issued maybe this year, January. It said that maintenance cost of IMS facilities all over the world have been increased rapidly every year, and as well as increasing workload. We need a solution to overcome those difficulties. I think the best way is to establish a regional maintenance and or installation center on each continent. Those centers, I think, will contribute to promptly taking actions on unexpected system failures, and also can play a role or focal point for regional cooperation. Anyway, ultimately, we will be able to improve the data availability and the quality of IMS network of CTBTO. For this case, we hope to play a role of Asian hub based on operational experience until now. In summary, I would say it's a just time for considering regional cooperation in order to strengthen detection capability against the nuclear test. I think it's okay. So thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting idea to try to work on this particular region, and of course, Hossam Ali.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish to again join my voice to my colleagues who have actually expressed gratitude for Asan for enabling us to take part in this extremely interesting and rich conference. I want to address maybe the issue of technologies from a different perspective, which is its relevance to international cooperation and to potential entry into force of the CTBT. And I think that we've reached a stage now that we need to reconsider exactly the way forward where it relates to those. We all know that the treaty has been actually promoted since the inception of the PTS through a very intensive outreach set of measures and activities, together with an international cooperation effort that systematically supports individual countries and regions and interacts with them in promoting the verification technologies as an incentive, an additional incentive for the ratification and joining the treaty. I think that in the past there was increasing efforts to promote the civil applications of the verification technologies, and it has paid off a bit. This was mostly done to fulfill a number of purposes that were very helpful at an earlier phase of CTBT PrepCom work, and I think now we really need to visit that. If we highlight particularly the objectives at the time from promoting international and regional cooperation, the entire focus was in order to enhance awareness, to promote capacity building, to promote bilateral exchanges on this regard, and also in regional frameworks, promoting regional training centers, like for example my own country hosts within its own national data center a training center for African nations on verification technologies, mostly seismology and otherwise. I am very much aware that in order to defend its existence, some serious effort has been done trying to find a role for the possible use of verification technologies for other non-verification purposes. And I think that at this stage we need to be extremely sensitive before promoting or trying to sell the treaty as such, because the best we can get perhaps is an additional signature here or there, but the time will dictate a different approach if we aim at any success on entry into force. I think a number of considerations have to be taken into account. One, that actually, despite the very useful value of technical cooperation and promotion of scientific exchanges on the verification technologies, we need to upgrade this process to include more the political, legislative, and diplomatic circles within the same country as well. I think in many cases, countries which are required to verify the treaty for its entry into force, particularly 9 countries now remaining, it would definitely have a much better impact if they see how the technical cooperation on a regional or bilateral level helps to contribute to their own national security through their enhanced ability to detect nuclear tests through data they obtain from the IDC, and that they can actually handle properly and make and arrive to the proper conclusions through the expertise they have. And I think these are the time to really underline that very much. I think that also we need to know that we need an approach that acknowledges any effort to promote the entry into force of CTBT as an individual instrument, not taking into account the larger picture, is probably very likely to fail. The CTBT, by definition, and I think my own country has a very strong position on this, that we are glad that we think that history proved us right. The CTBT is one of the regimes that are established, or a legal instrument established to consolidate the NPT. In our own purpose, this is, and of course it's obvious for all because it's one of the 13 practical steps to bring the treaty into force. It's one of the very important steps towards nuclear disarmament. For us, we don't see it as only non-proliferation, but it has a nuclear disarmament value, and this nuclear disarmament value will not be helped in a condition where the NPT itself is in question. We have another session on the NPT this afternoon. I think it should be a very interesting one. But I want to say that the CTBT is a product of a number of factors that maybe are now slightly undermined or different. So for it to enter into force, we need to keep those factors in mind. One, for example, was that despite the fact that the comprehensive test ban was proposed for a very long time, it was merely finalized in a very limited period of time once political will was there for it. I think the process clearly was very helpful in distribution of roles between diplomats and scientific experts putting together this massive effort. I'm very honored to be here among people which were engaged in this, particularly Dr. Dalman, Jennifer, and I remember the early days how an incredible effort it was to bring those two together. Currently, I feel that there's slight isolation between the two efforts, both in the political and in the technical one. And I think that we need to make sure that we fix this as we can. Also, I think that at the current stage, we might perhaps have heightened prospects for entry into force if we manage to use this previous success in the 2010 review conference on moving forward. But I want to highlight in this regard a particular outcome on 2010 that maybe indicates what I'm trying to assume here, that the situation is different and the call is different. Normally, the call for entry into force would say that calling upon those countries, in particular Annex II countries that have not ratified the treaty, to do so, and to call on those who did not sign the treaty to do so as well. But in 2010, the outcome text is very clear. It recognizes a special responsibility for the P5 to ratify the treaty. It is like directly calling upon them to do so, because they know that P5 ratification, the two remaining countries, are crucial for more progress to be done with the remaining Annex II countries. But more importantly, it recognizes that non-MPT members play a crucial role in this. And I think the major hiccup in moving forward on this is the obvious dependence of any progress with the entry into force on creative approaches to move regional processes forward, particularly in the Middle East, in the Korean Peninsula, and in South Asia. Without which, I don't think we can move forward on entry into force. For example, in the Middle East, if Iran, Israel, and Egypt are the countries remaining among Annex II to ratify the treaty, I don't think that any of them is going to be willing to ratify it very soon, in absence of the implementation of 1995 resolution, for example, or at least any regional process aiming at a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region, any kind of declaratory move by Israel towards the NPT. I think that there is a larger picture that CTBT relates to, and no progress on CTBT will be achieved without parallel and equivalent progress on that larger picture as well. One important and interesting dimension here I would maybe just like to refer to is the Secretary General's 5-point plan put forward by Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, in 2010 in October. I think it actually puts forward a vision that says we need to make small block building efforts of simple legally binding instruments that address one issue or another. We can have a legally binding instrument on negative security assurances, a much sought requirement in the NPT context. We need to look at possibility to initiate negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty. We need to see the larger picture changing. I think this is just something I needed to highlight very briefly. Finally, I think that one of the major issues here also will connect us to the other debate on how the Conference on Disarmament can be again activated. If the CTBT managed to leave the Conference on Disarmament, perhaps without full consensus at the time, I think we are now in the other side of the complex challenge, which is starting another set of negotiations without that consensus. And I think we need to be very creative on this regard. I seriously believe that some success in initiating negotiations on a balanced program of work for the Conference on Disarmament will immediately bring along lots of promise on moving forward the process, given that regional efforts in the Middle East, in South Asia, and in the Korean Peninsula can be moved forward. I just wanted to highlight those. Perhaps in the afternoon session, when we assess in more depth the 2010 outcome of the 2010 review conference of the NPT, perhaps we will address it from a larger perspective and see how this can move forward. I hope this is helpful, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Hossam. So we have 2 of the 9 states represented here, and the second one I call on Mr. Wang. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'll be very short because much of the points have already been covered by my previous colleagues, and by describing for you in quite a bit of detail really what was really the general picture with regard to the treaty, this build-up, its verification regime, and so on. Please allow me really to wear 2 hats. One is my national hat from China, and the other one is the CTBT, because I worked for some time for the organization. Then I left it a year and a half ago. Basically, I started starting by leading the Chinese delegation into the negotiations and then into the business of the preparatory work, mostly in the on-site inspection, dealing with the drafting of the operational manual, finalizing into leading an inspection team through an exercise in Semipalatinsk. So that's my background, straightforward. So if you find me something wrong on one side, then I can always say that I was a professional from the other. So that's why I'm always safe. No. How, for instance, of course, this is reality that the treaty is not in force, and the entering the force protocol, the conditions for the treaty is very stringent. But that really does not really diminish the fact that the treaty itself institutionalized an international norm, which is a very important one, which also has very much a relevance for this area, for the Asia-Pacific area. And that is a ban for all nuclear tests, for all environments, for all time, by anybody in the world. Conversely, we could, for instance, imagine the absence of this norm, the institutionalization of this norm, then it would be, for instance, officially, or at least politically, free for all. Against today's international environment, this is inconceivable. We very much really work on the premise, and we take it very much for granted that there is a treaty, and most of really the international community members are already members. Some are ratifiers, some are signatories, and they work on it. So this is much a given. The other one is that the treaty, as David said, the treaty has already been, particularly the verification regime, has been really built up, almost ready. When I say almost ready, is because I regard these parameters very, very, very seriously, significantly, and that is, for instance, the over 80%, 85% of the stations are ready. And the data collection rate is above 90% yearly round. And that is why when, for instance, the very unfortunate Fukushima case happened, then actually the resource as given by, the data resource, particularly the denucleated source, as a data was made readily available for use, for a joint venture by international organizations like, for instance, the CTBT, WHO, and WMO, and then, of course, the IEA. Because during that period between, say, late March and March of April, I was advising on the emergency office for China, and then I know, at least for the case of China, we relied on this reference very much. We also learned that not just China in this locality, but other governments also really made a good reference, for instance, to the ATM model, the atmospheric transport model that was composed by the organization. This model tells us many things, very visual, very straightforward, and I think quite reliable, very effective. It tells you, for instance, the transport pattern, the cycle, the period of the cycle, the dispersion period, and also even, for instance, the source terms and also the decay rate and everything. That was very much I think, on the page, on the web page itself, it doesn't really say much, but actually it's years of work and years of investment behind it. And without such preparation of work, such a product will not be available, such a service will not be available to help. That's why I said it's ready, almost. Then, of course, the shortest leg probably would be the on-site inspection. But that part is still, is also really, has seen some development, because the largest exercise in 2008, which was in Kazakhstan, was very much a mock inspection conducted. Of course, lots of lessons were learned based on it, and then, of course, we also realized that even then, particularly a year later in 2009, there was a perfect case in this area that should there be, for instance, the case that the treaty is in force, and very highly probably that there will be a request for on-site inspection to be conducted in the neighborhood. That would probably also really tell the world what is really the true nature of the event. We had detection, we had location, we had, of course, we did not really have the possibility, like the first test, to detect noble gas. But then probably one is the weather, or maybe others, for instance, like deployment, lots of things. But probably on-site inspection there would help. The other one I really want to touch on is also really the regional cooperation, because I really see this as, I mean, the CTBT as an organization, as an institution, and the international verification as a resource is available to all the signatories. Particularly if you think about, for instance, the three countries here in this neighborhood, Japan, China, Republic of Korea. These three countries contribute over 25% of their contribution into the process. Over the past 12, 13 years, this is part of their investment. But unfortunately, we have colleagues from this region who are more concerned about, for instance, how the budget is spent, where the money went, what projects are spent, are on, and so on and so forth, without realizing that while you invest, all your investments will produce returns. These are fruits for you to pick. Because we, from China, we not just that we contribute our shares, but also we realize that there are other parts we have to contribute. We can contribute. Particularly, for instance, in the OSI on-site inspection area, we have joint R&D projects. First part is with the Secretariat, and then, of course, jointly with other countries like, for instance, Russia and Sweden, to develop mobile noble gas detectors, xenon and argon. These equipment are ready now, are available. But unfortunately, we don't really see some kind of a regional cooperation to make good use of all these resources, all these techniques, and all this knowledge. Even, for instance, we do have a case like, for instance, North Korea. I noticed also, for instance, our colleagues from this country, from ROK, some experts, they utilize not just the IMS IDC data when they really want to have a focus-in analysis of the characters of the test, 2009 particularly. They actually make good use of the local stations. These stations are not really part of the CTBTO, not even, for instance, the auxiliary stations. Some of the stations are very, very local, just across the border into China. They use that data, which means there is nothing particularly that's in front of us for the regional cooperation, which means there is a high call for us really to pick the fruit that we ourselves have helped growing, which also means that there is actually a big gap for, because I was the witness there, for the general participation from this area, Asia-Pacific area, into the CTBT build-up process. The IMS IDC regime is very much a self-improving process, but it's just a process very much led by, fortunately not, but realistically, it's very much led by our American and European colleagues. Not too much really from experts of this area. So to sum up, what I see, for instance, where could be some practical ways of cooperation regionally is perhaps, for instance, there could be exchanges among the NDCs, national data centers. For instance, there could be some kind of a cooperative participation in the activities organized by the CTBT. For instance, I know the on-site inspection will continue into the future, and they are now planning for another round of exercises, and that's a plan for 2014. Unfortunately, for instance, for the last exercise, despite my strenuous effort, I could not get in any one of our Japanese colleagues to join the exercise, despite the fact that they had very capable and renowned expertise. So, participation in some sort of a coordinated fashion. Then, of course, nothing stops for us, really, for instance, to have exchanges among the expertise of the IMS technologies or on-site inspection technologies. And then, of course, we could even have joint projects really to have R&Ds so that we can jointly contribute to the build-up of the verification regime represented by the treaty. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've heard some positives and some negatives. And I have a number of questions I'd like to ask about precision monitoring and regional cooperation and so forth, but I don't want to dominate the discussion. I'd like to open it up to the floor and let you go right ahead. Please.
First of all, my name is Alexey Finenko. I'm from Institute of International Security Studies, Moscow, Russian Academy of Sciences. And I have two questions for discussion about the Russian position on CTBT, because in my opinion it's a very important and interesting question. The first, I remember we had the discussion in 2000 about the ratification of CTBT. And there were a lot of people who was in opposite of this ratification, especially Russian militaries in Russian parliament. Why? Because they have two counter-arguments. The first, the potential using of international monitoring system as a dual-use technologies. Especially the question was, can the United States using this station from its future ABM systems, from monitoring to the other and to the other places. And the second was the geographical issues, because our military said that a lot of this station placed on the United States allies territory, especially in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Europe. Not in Russia, not in China. And that is why Russian military are worried about this. Russia ratified CTBT, but today, we have the second at the top of this discussion, because Russia is only one state, nuclear state, who is participant on CTBT, because France and Great Britain ratified CTBT, but they don't have the monitoring of official monitoring of nuclear testing. But Russia has official monitoring of nuclear testing and participant in CTBT. And that is why today in our parliament, in our Ministry of Defense, a lot of people said that it is necessary from Russia to withdraw from CTBT. And that is why my question is, what is, in your opinion, perspective on CTBT? If the other nuclear states do not ratify CTBT in the next 10 years, Russia could be withdrawn from CTBT. And what should we do in this hypothetical but real crisis situation with international monitoring system?
Well, thank you. I mean, 3 of the nuclear weapon states have ratified, as you know, the UK and France in addition to Russia. Would anybody else like to contribute to an answer? Ola?
I can try. Well, the first question, I think, was very clear. Can any country use those monitoring stations for sort of an illicit purpose, a purpose outside the purpose and one that is not connected to a civilian and recognized application? I think the answer is no. It's very hard to see that you can, through these things, get anything of any particular. We've had a little bit of discussion about that. We had the hydroacoustic monitoring system. Can they be used to track submarines? And the answer is no, because they're totally different systems you need for one and the other. There was also some discussion on the infrasound system. Can they be used to track supersonic aircraft? Yes, they can, in a very, very local area around the stations. But on a strategic or even tactical level, it's not interesting. So I think on your first question, it's a very clear no. I think everyone will agree that there is no possibility of doing that. Then I'm not sure I understood your second question. I don't see that there is any difference in the there is no monitoring going on at the moment, because the treaty has not entered into force. So what's going on here, and I'm sure we can hear more about it from Dave, is a testing and evaluation of the system in Vienna. And no particular country is exposed to that in any way different from anyone else. I don't know, Dave, would you expand on that?
Let me explain this.
Yeah.
It was in 2003 when...
Let me explain this difficult point. It was in 2003 when the United States military inspection was visited Novaya Zemlya. And there were some contradictions between Russia and United States about the zero yield problem on CTBT. And after that, Russian Ministry of Defense said that the United States is in favorable situation for modernization its nuclear potential, because they don't have the limitation from zero yield and threshold and threshold yield problem. But today, Russia started the modernization of nuclear potential, and a lot of our military said that CTBT it's a big problem for future Russian modernization, because if United States do not ratify CTBT, they are in a favorable situations than Russia. That is, such is, I believe, my question for the second question, what is a big problem for CTBT?
I see. Yeah, I think if I should just give a try then, I think this issue of zero yield, and I think Jennifer said that very much in the introduction. I mean, I think it's generally accepted that zero is zero, and then there are some tests conducted by the US, and actually by China, I think, where they do nuclear-related experiments, which are not releasing any nuclear energy. And they are certainly not prohibited under the treaty. So I think there's been a lot of discussion, and I know about this situation you described. But we have the same discussion in the US. So I think it's good if your colleague in the Duma and those in the Senate sit down and sort out this problem. I think that you have a common problem here, obviously.
And that's been suggested by a number of people in both governments, as you probably know. Yes, sir.
McNally from the U.S. I think that you are to be credited with a great deal of work and on the verification issue, going over lifetime, as you pointed out, Ola. However, I think the panel represented only one facet of the CTB issue, and that's this technology directed toward verification. It does not direct at all to the issue of treaty crafting, which is a problem, and the other issue is state-specific issues that also are not included at all in this discussion. So we've heard a third of the issue. Thank you.
Well, perhaps you could specify which treaty crafting issues you would see to be...
Not in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
That's not the subject. It's a state-specific thing.
Mm. Yes.
Well, I heard the technical side, but one very realistically thinking that how do you see the future of CTBT? I mean, keeping in view non-ratification, non-signatories, do you think that this treaty is going to be implemented in future?
Well, Hossam might have a different idea, but I think, of course, it depends on the states concerned. I mean, many people think that if the U.S. takes a leadership role, as it has done in the past, that others will follow. Some countries have said as much. And then it's a question after that whether or not that really happens. I doubt that countries will go ahead of the U.S., but I might be wrong on that. Hossam, you have?
I think the CTBT is already being implemented now. I think it has a very specific nature as a legal instrument, not to compare with others. The teeth of the CTBT is represented in the verification regime, which is operated by states that are signatories in it, and those are the very ones who analyze the data that they obtain from those and arrive at conclusions that are the verification conclusions. So from a practical standpoint, the treaty is being implemented, but it is of course missing the entry into force, which would give it, which will give it a completely different presence among other legal instruments. And of course, in terms of violation, the responses would be different. In terms of running the post-PrepCom phase, it's a totally different story. But the main objective of this treaty is already there, and it's costed $1 billion. So I think that the question is that if we look at CTBT as a work that finishes or ends by opening it for signature, you just finalize the text of a treaty and throw it in the market, you got nowhere. I think that it's work in progress, that it will still take a lot of effort and a lot of work in the context of CTBT and well beyond it, in order to move it into an entry into force zone, and it will take much more work than that will be restricted to a CTBT perspective in order to move it forward, particularly relating to the MPT regime and on the regional existing rivalries that are preventing the entry into force, because Annex 2 countries are particularly prevented or in no political or regional situation allowing them to ratify the treaty. Without that, I think it will remain like that. But it is not doomed. It is not failed. Of course, it's in a very delicate situation. Secretariat cannot run forever on several applications of nuclear technologies and finding new raison d'etre. I think at the end of the day, the focus will be verification, and it will need a collective effort for that. And I think we're moving towards that direction.
As you know, I mean, there's been a moratorium in effect by U.S. and Russia since '92, and by China and France since '96, and a few other countries tested since then, but nothing recently. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Peter Krill from the Arms Control Association. Following a bit on the last point, you did have the Indonesians essentially going ahead in terms of going ahead before the United States. And that leads me to...
it hasn't happened yet.
Right. They've declared as much. Right. And that leads me to a question for Mr. Wang, preferably with your national hat on. It's the Indonesians that declared last year that they were essentially reversing their position in terms of waiting for the United States to go first. Where is China in the ratification process, and what are the prospects of it essentially doing the same?
Okay, I'm wearing my national hat. The ratification case has already been forwarded by the government to the legislation. That's one. They are now assessing the situation as much as, for instance, as the government. Now, what the government is doing is very much really working toward entering the force, not just, for instance, China's ratification, because we believe there is, particularly by the end, there should be a requirement for all the efforts, not just the one or two ratifications, but really there should be a collective effort really to work toward the final, and to cross the final hurdle. Because Otherwise, we are not really doing justice to our own selves, to others who have ratified before us. There is a huge, huge amount of political investment and so on and so forth that's already in place. That's it.
Anybody else? I'm getting signals. Sorry, in the back I didn't see. Sorry.
Well, I am Professor Murthy from India. Now, my problem here is, I think, the comprehensive test treaty does not address properly the simulation test, computer-based simulation test. Advanced countries can go for it without any problem. China, advanced countries like America, France, and UK and China can go for computer-based test. With a monetary system, cannot practically work here. In the sense, you cannot detect it. And that kind of issues are not addressed, I think, in the comprehensive test ban treaty. It is, really speaking, it looks as if it is not comprehensive. And the test only, ban is only for less developing countries interested for nuclear test. This is a kind of central problem that we are facing in comprehensive test ban treaty. First, point one. And the second thing, it is connected. In fact, comprehensive test ban treaty is not, that treaty cannot be addressed singularly. It's all connected one. For example, fissile materials, the flow of fissile materials are now uncontrollable to some extent. If you just look at Pakistani case, Ekukan syndrome. And plus, you have a problem here that the Americans appearing to be not very happy about comprehensive system, comprehensive test ban treaty, because they believe in BSI now, the new concept they are coming out with. For the last 10 years, they have been airing these views, the proliferation security initiatives. This is one of the reasons why the Americans are promoting this concept. They don't believe in comprehensive test ban treaty as such, and they don't believe in NPT as such, although NPT failed. And it looks at comprehensive test ban treaty is also going to fail. So this is kind of argument, kind of problems that I personally feel that has to be addressed properly. Thank you very much. I think Chinese professor.
Well, I think Ola answered a little bit about the low yield testing. Any yield is not permitted. Other tests that do not yield nuclear fission are allowed. So subcriticals are allowed, and the hydrodynamics are allowed, but not hydronuclear testing. And I think that's been much discussed among all the countries, and that was the agreement. So in terms of U.S. agreeing to, I think that they do believe in the NPT. I think some in various areas do believe in the CTBT as well. It's a fight that's ongoing in the U.S. Senate. Any other Mr. Wang, just a quick reply.
Yeah, very quickly to respond to some of the points, because I do recall in 1976 when Ambassador Arundhati, when she spoke on behalf of India rejecting the treaty, the comprehensiveness or the lack of a definition itself in the treaty itself was not really the argument she used. In other words,
Are you saying the lack of definition was a problem for her?
No. It was not. It was not a problem for her because she quoted other reasons.
Right.
And second, I'm sure in India, if you design a car, you use CAD. And for a collision, for instance, if you could, to save money, you would really run it through computers. Nothing wrong with it. Same analogy. But really, for instance, how far the U.S. would appreciate the treaty now, we better ask them. But through my observation, I think they are dead serious. Otherwise, they wouldn't really make a presidential commitment really to push for the ratification of the treaty.
Well, on that
and then, of course, you also mentioned the fissile material. I think that's a separate issue.
Well, thank you very much. On that positive note, I think we have to close because we've run out of time, and the conference people have told me that that's the end. Thank you very much for everybody coming.
We will now have a quick coffee break.